Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Cold War. Cold War is kind of an epic love story through the ages, going from about late 1940s until maybe early-ish 60s, I guess, and mostly tells the tale of a romance between Victor and Zuzana or Zula, and kind of their evolution of their romance through the ages, or through, I guess, the Cold War, even though it's not like all the Cold War. One thing I really like about this film is, although it is telling its tale over many decades and many years, and time dramatically changed in post-World War II Europe, this mostly takes place in Poland, kind of them leaving Poland and going to France to pursue music more, because Victor is a composer, and he finds Zula in this kind of thing he's trying to do where he records people from various towns and villages in Poland. He's going to put together a traveling show to kind of show off Poland's musical heritage, and he meets her through there, and it goes through jazz and pop music and all the various things they do together, and their romance blooms. What I like about this film, I think, in some ways, it's telling a lot of tale of history, but it's almost telling more of the story of their romance. History is more of the kind of like backdrop, or it's not something you should watch to like learn about the post-World War II environment. It's kind of using it as the setting, but not really getting into all the details. In fact, it doesn't even get into all the details of their relationship. The first time you see them have sex, they almost feel like too comfortable, and you sort of think like, have I missed something? And there's parts that you feel like you know, there's parts you feel like you don't. It kind of cuts around, but stays within the basic vibe and the changes of their relationship, which becomes very interesting and inviting and inquisitive, because you kind of want to see where it goes and how it changes. But their relationship almost becomes like kind of this weird like poison, whereas at first you kind of want them to get together and you think they're really beautiful together. You realize that they are sort of not mentally in the greatest shape, and I think are kind of almost abusive in what they're doing. You know, it sort of goes through being beautiful and romantic, and then kind of as the narrative goes on, you kind of sit there and you kind of think like how much like almost poison this relationship is for both of them. They make like pretty horrible, disastrous, stupid decisions, and not in those ways like, oh, I spent too much money at a restaurant. It's more just like, you know, I went back to Poland even though I defected because she's gonna be there, and then they, you know, break my hands even though I'm a piano player and music composer. And you kind of wonder like, well, why would you want to go back to Poland anyway? But they like have this drive to it, and they're kind of like feeling of kind of their home being replaced, of being cut off from their own home in Poland, want to go back. And it's kind of interesting following these characters, because in some ways it's more interesting to follow characters who are just kind of all over the place. But what I liked about this is he follows them so distinctly. Oftentimes I've thought about post-World War II world. Both these characters had lived through World War II. What that world would have been like, seeing that evolution, like seeing rock and roll happen, like what's that perspective like? You must have thought it was all kind of crazy as you're seeing the 50s and the 60s evolve. And it did kind of reference what I've even heard from people who existed at the time, that it did feel like the world was kind of like had evolved in this kind of strange way that you never expected. And I don't know if I feel that way. Well, I guess I do currently, but I don't know if I felt probably the way that they did, and it kind of got that feeling within it. I really liked the two leads, who are very beautiful together and very beautiful separate. Joanna Klung, who played Zula, is really amazing in this film and very beautiful, and is able to change more so with the times. Like you see her evolve and change with it. It almost feels like in some ways like her personality is forever evolving and changing and shifting, and almost that metamorphosis almost feels like she sort of has an identity in each of those times, but universally almost has no identity, and she almost feels lost because of that. And she is sort of lost because she isn't as connected to her home. Tomi's Not, who plays Victor, he's incredibly handsome and really very good, and you do feel as the film goes on like the lived-in nature of his life and the worriness on his face. He feels always conflicted. He feels like he's happier in some places, but he often feels like he's definitely left something behind. He has all that life and experience on his face, kind of like a real worldly man kind of does, where you're like, oh, you've been around the block a few times, you've seen some shit. Not that she doesn't, but I think he often carries it more in his face than necessarily she does. and they are kind of crazy, more aloof people. There's a scene where Rock Around the Clock is playing where she's just going kind of a little crazy, and that's fairly memorable. I like kind of the sweet story of this film. The 4:3 aspect ratio, or the Academy ratio, I'm not exactly sure what ratio it is, but it's certainly not using the entire frame of the movie screen, was interesting. In some ways it reminded me of seeing black and white foreign films from when I first got exposed to them, because most of that would be in 4:3 because of the TV I had at the time and the way Janus Films released them and the 90s VHS stuff and all that. I'm sure Janus released letterbox versions, but my local video stores didn't carry those all the time. But at the same time, I often wondered, like, I mean, is this supposed to be like the time period? But like, I mean, a lot of those films weren't doing that at that point. So like, I mean, it's like I was with it. I thought he used the frame very well, but I often would be like, well, why did you do this though? Because like when I've seen other recent examples like Wuthering Heights or Meek's Cutoff, it felt like they were going for a specific thing and they were using it to say something kind of more about the grime and the purgatoriness of it. When you think purgatory, you think 4:3, I guess. In Cold War, I semi got that, and I got that in it, but I didn't. It felt a little more like happenstancel and more of just a style for style's sakeness of it. I was fine with it, but I often was like, I mean, it is a very well shot film. Honestly surprised that a film that's 4:3 can get nominated for best cinematography nowadays. Not in a way that I'm mad at them. I'm more like, oh, that's an interesting choice actually. And I did find it kind of an interesting choice in how he used the camera and how he was able to shoot a film in 4:3 because nobody really does it. And Pawlikowski, I think did a very good job of using that frame, but it was often like, well, why did you do that though? Is something I could never really exactly understand about the cinematography in this film. I just never really, a little bit, there was a bunch of times I questioned the theory behind using that frame, like what was the purpose, and I don't know if it really answered it, but part of me was like, maybe I should just let it go, and like that's the style he chose and I should just be fine with it, and maybe I shouldn't have thought about it as much. The experience of watching this film I found odd because there's very few times when I see a film that I'm often questioning, like, where is it going, like almost the entire runtime. And I felt that way about this because where it starts is not where it finishes. Inherently has like a lot of different parts to it that like sometimes move cohesively, but there's a few times I have seen films where I'm constantly questioning where it's going, and this is definitely one of them. I guess aftertaste of the film was almost like better than the meal itself, and I was struck by it, and I was often thinking about it, and I saw it with my wife. She wanted to see it, and I really legitimately didn't know what it was about. It had a foreign movie trailer, so of course it's just like, you know, images of stuff and not people talking, which is like so helpful. Thank you. No wonder nobody sees foreign movies, every distributor ever. But I think it is a beautiful kind of romance. It's a romance of two incredibly sort of destroyed people, both by the world they live in and both by the fact that they should both seriously go to therapy. But it's based on his parents, which I was like, oh, that sucks, man. And apparently they kept breaking up and getting back together and having this volatile relationship. And it does feel like a very volatile relationship in a lot of ways. And especially towards the end, it felt most volatile. It's like you knew a couple and you're like, yeah, you know, I don't know, they've always got some shit, you know what I'm saying? And like, that's kind of Cold War. I often like this film quite a bit. I don't know if I'm in love with it as much as anyone else, but I almost feel like I would love to see it again, because it's a film that's really stayed with me in a lot of its moments, and the evolution of it is unlike any film I've seen this year. It really like changes and evolves and moves in such a way, and it reminds you of that period almost. You know, maybe their romance is the perfect reflection, because I don't think anyone in 1945 thought in 1964 there'd be the Beatles, you know. And I think that's a dramatic cultural shift between the two, probably one of the more dramatic cultural shifts in human history. So seeing this relationship kind of go up, the ups and downs of that, was insanely interesting. In sort of a voyeuristic sense, you wanted to follow that relationship and you wanted to see where it's going to go, but you almost, like, by the end were like, almost felt bad for them and felt bad watching it, because not that you feel bad about watching the movie, but you felt bad about like peering into their relationship because you felt like this should be private, and that you're like, wow, this is just disastrous for everyone, including the people in the relationship. And seeing that kind of a love on screen kind of reminds you, I think, that love is many different things for many different people, and people's relationship work in many different ways, and it might not make sense to you, and I don't think theirs even does make sense for them. I'm not speaking as someone who thinks I'm like the expert on it. I often was struck by how bizarrely negative and how bizarrely self-destructive their relationship really was, but that almost made it more interesting. And I often think I feel bad for him that this was his parents, but it almost feels like an epic kind of love letter about his parents. It feels like a lot of foreign film this year, or the major ones that are getting all the awards, whether it be Roma or Mirai, is about family and relationships, and especially with this in Roma, about their past and them growing up. And I think this is a perfect encapsulation of it, and he showed it with utmost respect, but also didn't shy away with the relationship it really was, and the evolution of the beauty of it getting together, the beauty of it existing, the beautifulness that it created, and the ugliness that was going on within it at the same time. And I think Cold War gets to all the kind of, it's a beautiful romance, but it's a realistic romance, and sometimes maybe that's one of the better romances to have. And it's one of the better romances to kind of have, is to show what a romance is really like. And I think going through the kind of evolution and the hills and valleys of that is kind of the real life of any long-term relationship. And sometimes in the end that doesn't always look as perfect as maybe the typical kind of beautiful, wonderful fairy tale type of romance. And this kind of shows you the realness of a kind of very volatile relationship between two real artists, and how they both tore themselves apart while also having a very beautiful love story. So if you have seen Cold War and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.